welcome everybody. This particular webinar is how to publish phase 2, and it's about peer-reviewed articles and how to write them and how to get them accepted. So what we're going to talk about is why a peer-reviewed journal article, how you can find a theme in what you have available to you to write about, choosing a journal, the type of article that you might consider publishing, how to go about doing your first draft, what the submission process is like, what is the peer review process like, and rejection, honestly, is just the beginning. So let's get started, and really, let me introduce myself. My name is Joanne Preston. I've had my doctorate for a very long time. I have published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals, as well as about 15 or 20 books. I haven't really counted them, but I've been around the publishing business for a long time. I'm also the editor of the Organization Development Journal, which is a premier journal that is well known internationally for organization development and change. And I've been that journal editor on and off for probably 15 to 20 years. And that I haven't counted either. But this last stint for me has been 8 years. So it's been a long time. Okay. I want everybody to turn their mics back on. Let's start with Lee, if he will introduce himself. Tell me why you're attending this webinar and maybe where you are in your program, okay?
Yeah, so Lee Morgan, the reason why I'm attending is new into faculty position and looking to get some things published and understanding more about the process.
And your field?
Educational leadership
Great.
and policy
Wonderful.
studies.
Okay, Nikki.
Hi, yeah, I'm in third year of a 4-year PhD program. I'm looking at significant moments in science.
Okay, very good. And let's see. Oh, we lost Tanya. Tanya. Okay. While we try and get Tanya back, how about Amelia? Amelian? How about Quest? Could you write who you are and Tanya is back, but we don't have her mic on. We do, Tanya. If you could introduce yourself and say where you are in your program and why you're attending this webinar.
Yes, hello, sorry, I was just blocked. I had to get out and in again. Yeah, my name is Tanya. I'm actually sitting in Germany, in Munich. And I resisted because I've been a DCU PhD student until very recently, until February. So I've already finished and yeah, achieved my doctorate. But yeah, I'm interested to learn more about publishing. I think there's a lot more I can do, and particularly I want to turn my thesis into a book. I know this session is not particularly about this, but I hope I can still yeah, get some ideas how to go about it.
Quest, is there something you'd like to introduce yourself or? Okay. In the last webinar, talked about book versus articles. And I'm gonna review that, even though it's not part of this one, because I think most people think, oh, well, I've written 300 pages. I'm just going to turn this into a book. Well, here's the issue. Books are read by very few people, and the issue here, I mean, the average book is read by about 100 people. That's what the publishers who professionally publish books, unless it's a New York Times bestseller. By the way, any of you who have a question, turn on your mic and ask the question. Those of you who don't have a mic, then write the question and I'll read it and answer it. But the issue here is what you want to do with the book. If you want to build a reputation, then articles really are a faster way of doing it because more people read articles. Thousands of people read articles, whereas books, again, I mean, even if you have it on Amazon, if you self-published it, put it on Amazon, the average book is about 100 people, maybe 150, compared to an article which is by at least 1,000 or more. Articles are faster to get in published rather than books. And I'm not saying that a book is not a good idea. A book might be an excellent idea for your career goal. But, for example, Lee has already got a job, and I assume it's an academic job, and he's going to want to get his ideas out quickly, and the best way to do that then is journal articles. So if you're really interested in a book, then I talk a little bit about it in phase 1. Please go ahead and listen to that webinar. That will help you think in terms of how to approach doing a book. This particular webinar is about how to publish in a journal, specifically a peer-reviewed journal. So let's talk about why a peer-reviewed journal. Well, a peer-reviewed journal is then blind reviewed by people in your field who generally have a publication record. All of the people that do reviews for my journal are all people who are well published, and many of them are very famous in the field. But we keep that, we don't tell people who are reviewing for us. So the people who review are blind, as well as you who are sending in your manuscript don't know who's reviewing your manuscript, and they don't know you. So the idea is to judge the work on its own merit, which gives credibility to the journal. And that's really what you want if you want to build a reputation in your field. And I don't care whether you want to be a practitioner where you consult to people in your field who practice, like managers or technical people. It doesn't matter. The idea of getting your work out in a journal is really, really important. And the more that your journal articles are seen by other professionals in your field, and they say, this is really good work, well, the better respected you are in your field. Journals give you easier recognition, your name, because it's seen by so many people in the field, thousands of people. You get a quicker acceptance as a writer in your field. What's also great is the peer review process gives you feedback on your article, and that's really important because I don't care how many times I've had articles accepted. It is a rare thing for me to get a journal article accepted without having to rewrite something. And believe me, when your peers who don't really know you actually read your work and give you feedback on your work, it makes it a much stronger article if you go back and rewrite your article based on what your peers are saying to you. So it is really helpful and makes your article stronger if you do read what your peers say and then rewrite it. Now, believe me, the first time that I get an article back, I really get angry because somebody is saying that my work is ugly. And it doesn't matter who you are or how famous you are in the field. No one likes to hear that their work isn't wonderful because you spent a long time on it. So give yourself a break, put it aside for a couple of days, and then go back and reread the comments. Because honestly, every time I have followed what the reviewers have said, my article has been much stronger and of more value to the field based on what they said. The last reason why a peer-reviewed journal is that all of the publishing costs are paid for you. You get extra articles to send out to people that are important in your life. For example, your dean, your chair, I don't know, the president of your college, the president of your professional organization, whoever you want to impress, you get reprints of your article from the journal. So that's all of the publishing costs are paid. That is not the case in some journals. Some journals charge you big bucks to publish your work. So in a peer-reviewed journal, that is all paid for you. Okay, so you've got to find a theme. Now, why do I say you've got to find a theme? Well, chances are at least two of you mentioned you were finished your dissertations, and your dissertations are probably pretty long. They were written for an academic audience. Your committee was made up of mainly academics. You might have had one person who was a practitioner that was on your committee. Some of you had 3-person committees, some of you had 5-person committees, and all of those people wanted you to write a dissertation. And a dissertation is written for a different audience than an article or a book. And what you have to do is think about your audience and who you're writing for. And so consequently, you've got to take that 300 pages and break it down into something that you can write about. Now, most journals will give you 30 pages, of which 5 of those pages, chances are your references, which gives you 25 double-spaced pages to write your content. Now, that's not much. You just got finished writing 300 pages, 500 pages, and you've got to condense that into 25 pages. So you've got to pick out a theme that makes sense. So how do you do it? Well, you look at your research question or questions. One of them may be more important than the others, and they have a more valuable answer to it. And the field is looking for an answer to that. So then what you do is you look at your dissertation and you say, okay, here is the question. Here is what I did in my study that helps to answer that question. Here is the results of that, and here is what that means. So you're taking one part of your dissertation and writing it. The last comment I have made on this theme thing is that each dissertation has at least 3 articles. You've got one that is a review of the literature. So it's a theoretical review of the literature, and you can say what it is that the field needs to be looking at in this particular sub-area. You've got several results that are important, and you can pull out different results from different themes and write articles. You also can write a practitioner article. So if you've written something that could apply, for example, Lee is in education, if this can apply to a practitioner in education, you can write an article specifically for people in the field who use what you talk about theoretically. So, like I said, there's lots of ways you can approach your articles. You can also look at major findings. Let's say the field has been looking for a particular answer to a question, and your dissertation actually answers that question. Well, then that's an article in and of itself. And if it happens to be a major contribution to the field, well, then you want to write about that and the significance of that in an article that is separate from other articles. So again, it's all about your audience, who you're writing for, and what's important to them, whether they are practitioners, whether they are academics, whether they are people that might use. Would chapter 1 or 2 be better suited for conversion into a journal article submission? Okay, chapter 1 is your review chapter. It pretty much summarizes the whole thing. That's a great chapter because it basically gives your major findings. So yeah, that's a great place to start. Chapter 2 is your theoretical justification for your methodology, and it may be a hole in the literature, and you can take chapter 2 and write a theory piece and say to your field, one of the things that you really need to look at is X, and the reason why you need to look at X is because of these particular areas that are important. Okay, so that is your theory piece, and you can write that in a theory journal. Then you can go back in another journal and write the major finding that you had and refer to the theory piece and reference that. So that's what I mean when I say your articles, you could have 2, 3, or 4 articles based on one dissertation. So the answer to your question is yes. And again, it depends upon the journal, and it depends upon your audience and what you're trying to do. So choosing a journal, well, there's hundreds and thousands of journals, and they're in all kinds of fields. And so one of the things you have to do is read journals. Well, you did read journals. You did your chapter 2 by reading journals. And so one of the things that you want to do is look at your reference list. If a journal is publishing articles in your particular topic area, then they're interested in that particular theory. And so consequently, that might be one of the journals you might want to consider sending your submission to. So what you're going to do is get a list of journals and decide which one is the most appropriate. And the best way of deciding that is get a recent copy of the journal from your library, or if it happens to be online and you happen to have access to it through ProQuest, then read a complete issue of that particular journal. There's a question. So maybe chapter 1 serves better as the lit review for an empirical study, whereas chapter 2 provides the point of departure for an in-depth theoretical review. And that is correct. So yes, your chapter 1 really synthesizes the backing for your methodology. And so it is the most important research that backs your methodology as to why you even did it. So yes, that does the empirical work, and the theoretical work is the hole in the field, okay? So going back to what I was talking about, once you get your list of articles once you get your list of journals you might be interested in, and you've looked at some of them, and you're saying, boy, you know, these 3 look pretty good for what I'm trying to write, then look at Cabell's. Now, Cabell's is several volumes, and they're only in library, and it says in every field, every journal that has ever been published and has a classification number, it says the journal name, the editor, where you submit it, what their publication number is. It tells you how many articles they accept on a regular basis, so the acceptance rate. It gives you all of that information. And so looking in Cabell's helps you to choose between the 3. So what do I mean about acceptance rate? Every journal gets lots and lots of manuscripts every day. And they have what is called an acceptance rate. Now, the acceptance rate is based on the first time a manuscript is submitted. And so when I receive a manuscript, I look at it as editor and try to decide whether or not I'm going to bother my peer review people to look at it, because it takes them at least a week to read an article and give good feedback on it. So I don't want to waste my professional's time with an article that may not be appropriate for my journal. So the very first thing I look at is this a topic that is appropriate for my journal? If it is, then I look at the next thing. Did they follow the instructions? Did they do what is asked in the author's guideline? If they didn't, I write them a nice letter back saying, or an email, obviously, saying, would you please look at the guidelines and resubmit based on that? That's a rejection, okay? So that's a rejection. If it doesn't meet the criteria for the content of the journal or doesn't follow the instructions, that's a rejection right off. Okay, so the rejection or the acceptance rate is based on 100 manuscripts. How many get accepted within the 100 that comes in? The journal that I am editor for accepts 10% out of 100, which means that I reject 90 on the first go around. Okay? Your A journals accept fewer. Most of them will reject 95 or 98% of the articles that come in on the first time. So the harder the acceptance rate, the higher the ranking of the journal. Now, A journals in your field are really tough to get into, and if you are persistent, you will get in there. but probably not the first time. What you want to do is get sent out for review on a journal, and then get the feedback and then rewrite it. Okay? So, what about online versus print? Well, first of all, you want a peer-reviewed journal, and there are peer-reviewed journals that are online. There are online journals that are not peer-reviewed, and if you choose to send your article to a non-peer-reviewed journal that's online, make sure before you send it that you've looked it up in Cabell's to make sure that it's legitimate. Make sure that you look at the editor and see what he or she has published. All you have to do is Google the person's name, and it will tell you all about their professional career. You want to look at the editorial board that is listed on the fly page of the journal and see how legitimate they are. Now, why am I telling you this? I was a dean at Colorado Technical University, and one of my really, really good students made a mistake. What about inviting my advisor to be second author? Absolutely invite, if your chair or your advisor is well published, that is an excellent way of getting your article at least sent out for review, by having that person be second author. And by the way, make sure that you agree right from the start that you are first author. This was your idea, and you ought to be first author, and they ought to be second author. And I'll tell you why, and then I'll go back to the story. As an editor, when I get articles sent to me, I look to see who's sending it to me. And if I know them and I know that they're well known, no, the slides won't be sent out, but you can listen to the presentation and be able to take notes on the slides. So, yeah, so there will be a link sent out to you. Okay. So what I do as an editor, if it's somebody well-known in the field, I put them in a pile that goes out for peer review right away, even if they're second author or third author, because I know that that person has really reviewed the manuscript. And so I only skim that particular manuscript before I send it out. If I don't know the author at all, never heard of them, they go in the far right. That means I've got to read that article carefully. If it is somebody that I have heard of, I'm going to put it in the middle, and if they haven't published a lot, I will read it. I won't read it as carefully as I will in the far right pile, because at least I've heard of their name. So that middle pile probably gets sent out for review. It is that pile on the right, the people I've never heard of, that I look at really carefully to see if they follow the directions, whether the content makes sense for my journal or not. And for you who are new in the field, you're going to be in that far right pile. Unless your advisor or your chair of your committee is well known in the field, and then you're going to be in the middle or in the left-hand pile. So yeah, it helps a lot. Okay, so the student who was really very good gave their article to another student to read and give him feedback on, which is great. But what he didn't know was the second student took the article put their name on it, as second author, and sent it off to an online journal. Now, when the editor of this online journal wrote back to both authors saying that we have received the article, the first student contacted me and said, I never sent this out. So I said, well, give me the information on the journal and I will contact the editor. Well, the first thing I did was look up the editor on Google, and I'd never heard of him, never heard of his work. He didn't have anything on Google. So then I started looking up the editorial board. The editorial board was fake. It had the last name of somebody at Yale, but the first name was different, and there was nobody in the faculty at Yale that had that name. So the editorial board was totally fake. Now, my student was very, very lucky because I got the article back from the editor by contacting the editor and saying that this submission was submitted without the knowledge of the first author, and I got it back. It could have been a real disaster. It could have actually been published by that fake online journal, and if it is published by any journal, that article is gone. It is owned by the journal, whether it's a fake journal or whether it's a real journal. So, one, don't send your article to anyone that you don't totally trust, okay? Two, make sure that the journal is legitimate, and believe me, if the journal has a print version as well as online, then they are more likely legitimate. If they are listed in Cabell's, they are legitimate, and if you have checked the editor and the editorial board, then you know they're legitimate. So, you know, online is fine, but just check them out. Okay, type of article. You can write a theory article based on your chapter 2. You can write an experiment based on one of the answers to your research questions and use chapter 1 as your justification for your methodology. You can write a case if your particular dissertation lends to that. For example, if you did it in a couple of businesses that are medium sized, you can take one of the businesses and write a case on it. You can write a practitioner article. And so a practitioner article then is how to. So one of the things that I did quite a while ago was I was working in South Africa, working to eliminate apartheid. Okay, there's a question. Must be very careful who we send our work in progress to for feedback. What about the pre-submission review services offered by reputable editing companies? Yeah, the word is reputable. Make sure that they are reputable. For example, DoctoralNet is reputable. And if you have your particular article reviewed by somebody there, then you know that your work is safe. So just make sure that the editing service is safe and reputable, okay? Again, you can look up the people who own it, who they are, what they are like in the field, all of that. So just check it out. Okay. In terms of the article in South Africa, it was back in the 70s, and at that particular time, in organization development, the largest group that we worked with was 8 to 10 people. In the situation that myself and my co-author were in, we were faced with 500 angry people coming from different tribes in South Africa that came to a meeting to think about working together to eliminate apartheid. And in that meeting, we chose to use an intervention where we kept everything very, very positive. And so what we did was we wrote 2 articles. One was a theory article saying that, listen, field, you can, because we had 500 people in that meeting and we worked 500 people the same way you work 8 to 10, we said to the field, listen, you don't need to limit it to 8 to 10 people. You can work 500. Well, now my field works thousands upon thousands at a time with technology. But at that time, in the early 70s, 500 was out of the question. So we wrote a theory piece saying that there was a hole in the literature. We also wrote a practitioner piece. This is how you work 500 people in one room like you work 8 to 10. So we got 2 articles out of one experience, okay? All right, I've talked about first author. If it's your idea and you write the first draft, then you are first author. And don't let anyone convince you that you are not the first author. And I've seen it with my students that they've had, as dean, their chairs have tried to convince them that they should be second author on their own dissertation. No, that is not right. So if it is your idea, you wrote the first draft, you are first author. Okay. In writing professionally, why is it different? Well, it's different because you're going to write in English. You're not going to write in jargon. I've seen articles come in that every other word in the first paragraph is, second author doesn't carry much weight in academian practice, I suppose. That's not true. If it's a 2-person article, first and second are equally weighted, but first gets a little bit more reputation. What's really, if you're third author, then you don't get hardly any credit at all. And what happens in a 3-author situation, at least in the American Psychological Association, after the first citing, when all authors are listed, it gets dropped to the first author only and the date. So you're right. The first author gets most of the credit. That's why you want to be first author on your work, because it's your idea. If it is a 2-person article, the second author never gets dropped. It's always Preston and Armstrong. It is always, and the date. It is when you get to 3 and 5 people articles. I even had one that was 10 that was sent to me, and I sent it back and I said, listen, guys, did all 10 people really work on this? I see, Han 2009, Han and 1999, but Han et al. Han et al. Is when there's at least 3 authors. So yeah, so Han gets all the credit in a 3-author or a 5-author study. That is correct. Okay, so you're going to drop jargon, or if you use a jargon word, you're going to explain it. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, I'm writing for an article, journal in my field. Everybody should understand that. Well, your fields are large and broad. And believe me, I don't know all the jargon in my field of change. So, I really like it when an author explains what they mean by a particular topic that they're using. So explaining your jargon. So if you can get away without using a jargon word and use English, then use English. Okay? Use simple sentences. I've seen articles that run on literally for an entire paragraph, and the paragraph is the entire page. You don't want sentences like that. You want the sentences to be clear, to be simple, and to flow. And so keep it simple and keep it interesting. Quotes. People think that by quoting a paragraph out of another article really helps the understanding of the concept that they're trying to get across. That's not true. First of all, I skip those long things. I don't want to read them. Do you? So what it does is it chops up the article. You're much better off putting those long quotes into your own words and referencing the idea to the original author. That continues the flow and continues getting the point across, because you're taking their point and justifying your idea. And you can do that easier by your own words rather than using the author's words. If there's absolutely no way that you can get around it, and you have to use a quote, then use one quote in 25 pages. There's a question. The editorial board may not be as knowledgeable about the jargon as we might think, but they are people who ultimately decide whether to publish our work in their journal. It's their journal, not ours, after all. Nice comment, Adrienne, because it's true. It is their journal, and their peer review people who they choose make those decisions. So keeping it in English rather than or in simple sentences and cutting out the quotes makes it easier to read. Now, have a friend read it, and what you want to do is get a knowledgeable, educated person who is not in your field, whether that's your spouse or whether it is a friend or whether it is a neighbor. I don't care. You've already had it read by your advisor, your chair of your dissertation. You've had it read by peers that you trust who are in your field, that are in your program, that are students. If you want to make sure that you are communicating what you think you're communicating, get a neighbor to read it. And if they understand what you are trying to say, then you know that you have written it in English, that it is simple sentences, there's flow to it, and a bright person understands the major points that you're trying to make. So, use those people that you respect that are outside of your field to make sure that your articles are clear. Okay, now, to get that first draft, many of us speak a lot better than we sit down and write on a blank piece of paper. So I encourage you to make an outline and then record it. And you can use Dragon Naturally Speaking. You can give a presentation to other students in your program. You can give a presentation at a local conference of your field, a regional conference, a national conference, and record yourself. And then put it into one of those programs like Dragon and get a rough draft. And then you can edit from there. Believe me, those are a great way to start, because you can, in most of those presentations, you're giving a 15 to 20 minute presentation, which means that your theme is limited and you are actually getting down to the meat of the point that you want to make. So I really encourage a recording to do the first draft. Okay, if you're going to write, for example, an experiment out of your dissertation, the first thing you write is your methodology, and make sure that that's clear. The second thing that you write is your introduction, your justification for the methodology, and make sure you're saying the reason why I'm doing this is because A, B, and C, and you justified your methodology. The third thing you write is the results, because they are straightforward. There's no explanation in the results. You are just reporting the data and making tables or making figures, and that is just very straightforward and factual. The next thing that you write is the discussion, and the discussion is all about why the results are important. And you tie it back to the literature, and you tie it back to the introduction, and if you don't have an explanation for the result that you found in your study in the intro, then you go to the literature and find a reason for why it happened and put that into your discussion. And the last thing that you write is your abstract. Your abstract is your ad for your article. And people don't realize how important that abstract is. What did you read when you were deciding what article to use for your dissertation? You read the abstract first, and you looked to see what the results were and why the results were important. And that's what you have to put in your abstract. It is, why should I read this article? And I have seen abstracts that are absolutely horrible. They don't say why the article is important in the last sentence. And if you don't do that, people aren't going to read your article. So write the abstract last, and then edit. And be sure that you edit over and over and over again. Okay, submission process. Now, my journal is an American Psychological Association journal. Many of them are in management psychology. There are other obvious formats that journals are in, MLA. You've got to make sure that your journal and their author guidelines are actually met. So one of the first things you do when you decide on a journal is get the author's guidelines. In an APA journal, you have to have 2 versions, and in a peer-reviewed journal, you have to have 2 versions. One is the editor's version, which has all your names in it. And if in your introduction you talk about the team and the members on the team and their names, in the second version you take that out. And the reason why you take that out in a peer-reviewed journal, the reviewers do not want to know. Some editing companies now offer services for video abstracts. When would video abstracts be required? If it is mentioned in the author's guidelines. The author's guidelines tell you everything you need to use to submit. It will tell you about what the margins are like. It will tell you everything, the number of pages if there's a limit. If there's a video abstract, they will tell you, and they'll tell you how long that video abstract should be. So all of that is in the author's guidelines. It's usually posted on the website of the journal, so you can get it there. Anyone can get the author's guidelines. They're always published in the journal itself, so if you have access to ProQuest, you can get the guidelines through ProQuest. But make sure that you do what the editor has asked you to do, or you're going to be rejected out of hand. So also, tables and figures are expensive for a print journal. They don't cost anything for an online journal. And if it's a combination of online and print, which most of your reputable peer-reviewed journals are, then they're going to want you to have your figures and your tables camera ready. And they're going to want you to have very few of them. So it's going to be the most important figures, the most important tables, not everything. The editor doesn't want to pay for all of your subjects and who they are and what their ages were. They want you to write that in the subjects area. They want only figures that show the significance of the results. So choose your figures and your tables carefully and make sure that they are camera ready. Make sure that you have an email that covers why your article is important. Make sure that you cover why it's essential for this particular journal to consider this article, because it's appropriate for this journal, and you know it's appropriate because you have read the journal. So these things are really important, but what is most important is making sure that you have covered the guidelines. Okay, so what I do is choose who gets to see the peer review. And so in some cases, you have an actual associate editor of peer review. Okay, so I do. And so what I do is I decide whether or not an article is worthy of going to the peer review editor. If I do, there are two things I do. I write my peer review editor and I tell him that this is an article that needs to be submitted to the peer review group, and we send it out to 3 people. So we get 3 blind reviews. The second thing I do is I always write all of the authors and let them know I have received the article. If you do not get a reply in email from your submission, whether you have submitted it to a website or whether you have sent it to a particular editor, if you haven't gotten anything in a week, write an email again and ask if the editor has received it. Don't wait months, because with submission processes, whether they are on a website or whether they are through email, it can get lost. And I have people who have written me and said, did you get my article a year ago? And I never received it. So I always send out a letter, an email saying, I have received it. I have sent it to the peer review person. This is the peer review person's name. I explain how long it will take to go through the peer review process and say, from now on, contact the associate editor for peer review until it's accepted, and then you will be talking to me. If you don't receive a letter like that, make sure you follow up. Okay, so then the peer review process, only the stripped down version of the article goes out to the peer review people. Some articles take as long as a year in peer review process. So the editor will tell you how long it will take. Cabells will tell you how long the peer review process takes. If it's taking longer than what the editor says, then you need to contact the associate editor for peer review or the editor and find out about what's going on with your manuscript. What will happen is that the associate editor or the editor will get the reviews back from the reviewers and then will compile one letter back to you about what the review process said about your manuscript. And depending on the journal, they will give you a very detailed description or a very vague one. If you get a vague one, write the editor or the associate editor and ask for more information if they will provide it, because the more feedback you get from your peers, the better your article will be ultimately, even if it's accepted. Now, when the editor gets all of this information back, they choose to accept it outright, accept it with revisions, reject, and resubmit, which is just like being accepted. If you get a reject but resubmit, then don't get angry. Go over those reviews, make those changes, and resubmit as quickly as you can. And then an outright rejection. And generally, there's kind of vague comments. And what you want to do is write the editor and get more specific comments to find out whether you should resubmit it to this journal or send it to another journal. I think it's really important that you are persistent. Rejection is only the beginning. Make sure that you have a group of people, and Doctoral Net is very helpful with this. We have groups of people who are going through the peer review process that I help by getting them to work together on their articles and submitting them, and then when they get their reviews back and they're disappointed, they can talk with somebody to help encourage them to resubmit either to another journal or to the same journal. Believe me, persistence pays off. It is a game. So what you want to do is take the feedback, decide what's appropriate, and then resubmit to another journal or to the same journal. If you resubmit to the same journal, then say in the cover letter, I have covered these things that the peer review people suggested that I changed. I didn't change this because of these reasons. So in other words, for the editor, tell them what you have changed and what you haven't changed. Questions? Okay, the presentation will be available. I've given you a lot of information. How important is the cover letter? It's an email now, but it is really important. What you want to do is, again, just like the abstract, sell your article to the editor. This is why I sent it to the Organization Development Journal. It is a great article because it fills this hole in the literature and provides these reasons in terms of the results that makes it important for your journal. So that cover letter is really your sales pitch to the editor to get from that far right pile into the middle pile or into the send out right away pile. So, you know, write that cover letter carefully. Other questions? Just as a comment, these are some of the things that Doctoral Net will be doing in the next few days. Okay, another question. How should we pick an editing service for our manuscripts? Is subject matter knowledge critical? No, the subject matter knowledge is not critical. Matter of fact, the clarity of the writing is the really critical thing. So if you've explained your jargon, then anybody can edit it. Just make sure that it is a credible source for editing. And keep in mind that Doctoral Net, some of you have used Doctoral Net in the past for editing for your dissertation. They also do editing for publishing. So you know that you've experienced that service in the past. It's been credible. It's been good. They have gotten you through your jargon, make sure that your dissertation is good. The same thing can be said about the process. If you don't choose Doctoral Net and do choose another editing service, then check it out first. Make sure that it is credible, okay? Other questions that you might have? If you have additional questions, you can contact me at Doctoral Net. I'd be glad to answer any questions individually. So thank you so much for coming and spending your time with me. I truly appreciate it, and hopefully those of you who are in my field, at least 2 of you who finished, probably have something that you could talk about change in. You might end up sending something to me. So I really wish you the best, and hopefully all of you will get published in your career. Bye.